Killing off a popular character or even iconic character in a movie franchise is an undeniably huge gamble. Get it right and you've given fans a moment they won't ever forget, but screw it up and they'll curse you forevermore. But sometimes, even if it makes sense for a character to die, the filmmakers just can't help themselves and let them stay dead. And due to their popularity, they're often inexplicably resurrected in a future sequel, often with a terrible retcon that undermines a previous story. And with that in mind, I'm Josh from Whatculture.com, and these are awful movie death retcons everyone hates it. Richard Parker, The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Okay, we're starting this list off with something of an honorable mention because Richard Parker's retcon revival actually didn't happen in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but rather in a deleted alternate ending that became infamous when it released online. So infamous, in fact, that it more than lives up to this title despite never actually being included in the finished flick. So, if you remember the Andrew Garfield era, you'll probably remember that the biggest differentiator in the story was that, unlike the Raimi films, there was a huge focus on Peter's parents. From the very first scene, it's established that they were killed under mysterious circumstances, and it's up to Peter to figure out who they really were and what they were up to. This is taken even further in the second movie, which actually opens on an action sequence that shows how they died after their plane was hijacked by assassins. Now, that's a pretty definitive death, but the very final scene of The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was actually originally going to reveal that Peter's father, Richard Parker, was alive and well. In this scene, Richard shows up while Peter is mourning Gwen at her grave, and the two get a reunion, and the audience gets a tease for a third movie. Understandably, people were very pleased this scene wasn't included. Though the same plot kinda does happen in the comics, it was a contentious move there as well, so I want to know what you guys think down in the comments. Harry Hart, Kingsman, The Golden Circle. Harry Hart's death in the first Kingsman film was brilliantly done. After massacring a church full of people against his will, he's shot in the head by villain Richmond Valentine. It's a shocking and devastating moment which provides red-hot motivation for Eggsy to kill Valentine at the end of the movie. And as much as fans did love Harry, it seemed like there was no possible way for him to come back after this. All the same, it was soon enough announced that Colin Firth would be back in sequel Kingsman: The Golden Circle. And following intense fan speculation about how he might return, filmmaker Matthew Vaughn basically just threw his hands up and went, I don't know, nanomachines, son. That's because it's revealed that moments after Harry was shot in the head, Ginger arrived on the scene and encased his head in a protective alpha gel before his damaged brain was repaired with nanomachines back at the Kingsman lab. Beyond being resoundingly stupid, it's a revelation which effectively cheapened every other death in the series because, well, why couldn't anyone be brought back with this tech? More to the point, Harry's death in the first Kingsman actually meant something on a character level for Eggsy, and the sequel undid it simply because Harry was popular. On top of all of this, saddling him with amnesia as well was some soap opera caliber storytelling. Michael Myers' Halloween Resurrection. You can nitpick about whether this is a true retcon or not, but let's face facts. Everyone who watched Halloween H2O and saw Laurie Strode decapitate Michael Myers with an axe had no reason to doubt that he was finally dead for good. But 4 years later, Halloween Resurrection was released and revealed in its opening scene that the man wearing the Michael Myers mask who lost his head wasn't actually Michael Myers at all. Rather, at the last minute, Michael attacked a paramedic, swapped clothes with him, and crushed his larynx to ensure that he couldn't scream out to Laurie and identify himself. Beyond undermining the end of H2O and turning Laurie into an accidental killer of an innocent man, it was just an eye-rollingly contrived, lazy revelation that had fans doubting the movie from the jump. The fact that Laurie was then killed by the real Michael a few minutes later sure didn't help either. Abraham Whistler, Blade 2. In the original Blade, Blade's mentor, Abraham Whistler, is brutally beaten and infected with vampirism by villain Deacon Frost's men. Rather than turn, Whistler decides to end his own life, shooting himself in the head as Blade mournfully walks away. While we don't see the bullet enter Whistler's cranium, we do see his arm lifelessly drop to the ground while holding the gun. Basically, there doesn't seem to be any ambiguity about his demise whatsoever. Plus, it's a great death, nasty and brutal, yes, but a defining part of the story. story? Well, in Blade 2, it's actually revealed that Whistler survived a bullet to the head because he'd already begun his vampiric transformation and has been kept as a prisoner by other vampires for 2 years. Blade rescues him and quickly cures him, more or less wiping clean everything that happened to him at the end of the first film, which might be forgivable if not for the fact that Whistler then dies again in the third movie, Blade Trinity. At the start of the threequel, Whistler's compound is raided by the FBI, resulting in him blowing it up and killing himself in the process. So yeah, you know what makes a retcon worse? Well, having it be all for nothing and giving someone a worse death than they had the first time around. Ramirez, Highlander 2 The Quickening. Highlander 2 The Quickening is admittedly a glorified cluster headache of a movie from start to finish, but it did leave many fans immediately baffled with its hilariously inane retconning of Ramirez's death. Ramirez is brutally decapitated, is there any other way, in the first movie, and though he appears throughout the sequel in flashbacks, he's miraculously resurrected later on in the story. After Connor McLeod defeats a villain, General Katana's 2 lackeys, he uses their quickening powers to both restore his own youth and bring Ramirez back to life. It's about as lazy a handwave as retcons get, using hazy fantasy nonsense to bring back a fan-favorite character in an attempt to juice the sequel's box office. But it famously did not work, as The Quickening both bombed commercially and was near universally panned by critics and fans alike. It didn't help either that this was one of several iffy retcons introduced in the film, showing how little respect the movie had for its own established internal logic. Hector Barbosa, Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest. Hector Barbosa was the unforgettable antagonist of the original Pirates of the Caribbean movie, but was very unambiguously killed at the end by Jack Sparrow, who shot him in the heart, leaving him deader than dead. Yet the second film, Dead Man's Chest, ends with the revelation that Barbosa has been inexplicably resurrected to guide the heroes on their quest to save Jack from the Kraken. It was nothing if not a jaw-dropping tease for the third flick at World's End, and fans spent the brief time between sequels pondering the creative means through which Barbosa's death would be explained. But it was merely confirmed that Barbosa was revived by a voodoo practitioner as part of the pact that the pair struck, and, well, that's about it. Sure, supernatural nonsense doesn't feel out of place in this franchise, but fans were nevertheless hoping for a more interesting explanation than just because magic. And while it was, of course, great to see Barbosa back in the sequels, regardless of how flagrantly lazy his revival was, he ultimately only ended up dying again, seemingly for real this time, at the end of the fifth film, Dead Men Tell No Tales. Baby Otis and Captain Spaulding, 3 from Hell. Rob Zombie's The Devil's Rejects isn't everyone's cup of tea, but it does conclude with a fittingly over-the-top and bloody finale, where the murderous members of the Firefly family, those being Baby Otis and Captain Spaulding, dive headlong into a police barricade. The trio, already gravely wounded, are shown being shot by the assembled cops literally dozens of times. Yet at the start of the belated sequel, 3 from Hell, we learn that all 3 of them inexplicably survived the incident. The movie's opening newsreel even draws direct attention to how ridiculous their survival is, noting that they were shot more than 20 times apiece and their chances of pulling through were 1,000,000 to 1. Though it's mentioned that the trio took a year to recover from their injuries, perhaps the most ridiculous thing of all is that neither Baby Otis nor Spaulding have any discernible scarring or major visual indicators that they were shot to ribbons by the authorities. Ultimately, it's a case of Zombie not planning for a third film when he made The Devil's Rejects, but after it turned a decent profit at the box office, a sequel became possible, and he had to pull a survival explanation out of his ass. Emperor Palpatine, Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. Somehow, Palpatine returned. Those immortal words are etched into the brain of every Star Wars fan in existence. And that's because the series' overarching villain, Emperor Palpatine, was of course killed by Darth Vader at the end of Return of the Jedi when he was thrown down a reactor shaft. So you can imagine that it was a little bit of a surprise to see his return confirmed in the Rise of Skywalker trailer. Fans were curious to see how old Palp's survival would be explained in that movie, yet the filmmakers basically opted to subvert this expectation altogether and just not really explain it. Consequently, the sequel opens with a title crawl explaining that Palpatine is back, having broadcast a message across the galaxy which is heard not in the movie, but inexplicably in the video game Fortnite. Palps is effectively brought back as a zombie puppet shadow of his former self with the help of Sith cultists. And while this is further explored in the surrounding novels, within the film itself, we get maddeningly little context for how Palpatine's death was undone. Ultimately, bringing Palpatine back felt like a desperate move to try and restore some fan goodwill, following the polarizing reception to The Last Jedi, no matter how little sense it made, or how bringing Palpatine back betrayed everything that his death meant for the heroes in the first place. Uncle Ben, Spider-Man 3. We opened this list with Spider-Man and we're sure as hell finishing with it. And honestly, even as the internet's biggest Spider-Man 3 defender, I cannot give this one a pass. Unlike every other death retcon on this list, Spider-Man 3 didn't undo the death of Uncle Ben, but rather changed the circumstances of his demise in a way that felt horrendously cheap and manipulative. See, in Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man film, Ben is killed by a carjacker who Peter allowed to escape moments earlier. It's a brutal revelation that teaches Peter a painful yet valuable lesson about heroism and justice. But Spider-Man 3 decided to toss this out the window completely, retconning Ben to have instead been killed by the carjacker's associate, Flint Marko, aka the Sandman. It was head-smackingly obvious that Flint was revealed to be Ben's true killer in a lazy attempt to force a deeply personal connection to Spider-Man. But this came at the cost of pretty much everything that Ben's death meant in the original movie, namely motivating Peter to be a better hero. And worse still, Spider-Man 3 didn't even have the courage of its convictions, as later on in the film it's revealed that Marko didn't actually intend to shoot Ben and has been plagued by guilt ever since. Yeah, I like this movie, but this absolutely sucks.